When selling a house, if a death occurred within 3 years of the house going on the market, the seller is required to inform potential buyers of said death. This little requirement wasn't necessary in my case. Everyone within a 50-mile radius seemed to know about Victoria Teller. It was a tragic story. She had given birth to a bouncing baby boy, whose father no one seemed to know. The baby passed away just a few months later, and Victoria took her own life a year after that. That much was known to be true. What was unknown were the circumstances surrounding the incidents, how the baby died. Some said accident, some said illness, some said murder, how Victoria killed herself and what happened in between. The popular rumour was that Victoria, in her grief-stricken psychosis, began buying dolls to replace her dearly departed son. The doll would then suffer the same fate as the real baby in her mind, and she would bury it and move on to another. People, mostly teenagers, made it a Halloween tradition to search for the doll graveyard. They searched the backyard and the woods behind it, but nothing was found in the 6 years that the house was empty. I was confident that the house that I had bought for my family had nothing strange in its history but 2 tragic deaths. The first few months living in the Teller house were uneventful. I had to occasionally shoo away curious locals that weren't aware the house was no longer empty, but I found no ghosts or satanic symbols or anything of the like. It seemed that it was just a house, one that I got a huge discount on because of what had happened there, and the bad juju it was rumoured to have acquired because of it. By the time Christmas season rolled around, I had pretty much forgotten about Victoria Teller. It was the first year that my son, Caleb, was really aware of anything other than presents. We lined the roof and windows with lights, hung a wreath on the door and put some standing decorations on the lawn. We bought and decorated a tree big enough to fit a toy store underneath, which was appropriate because of how many presents Santa was going to bring Caleb that year. He was getting more excited each day, especially since we had been dropping some pretty big hints that he was getting a puppy. My family was the happiest it had ever been, until a week before Christmas. My wife had been wrapping presents as we bought them so that we didn't have to stay up all night on Christmas Eve like we had in the previous years. She had opened the door to the closet that held the presents to find the wrapping paper torn to shreds. Her first thought was that Caleb had gotten into them, but I doubted that he would be able to contain his excitement if he had. It looked almost as if some sort of rodent had shredded the paper, but the boxes weren't damaged at all. We brushed it off as a mystery and moved the presents to the attic after rewrapping them. I occasionally heard some shuffling from inside that closet, but I never saw whatever critter had caused it. I figured I would call an exterminator after Christmas to check inside the walls. Soon things started to get really strange. I walked into the bathroom to find the dirty clothes scattered around the room and the hamper on its side. My wife found the refrigerator door hanging open, with food torn up and thrown on the floor. Caleb was distraught one morning when he woke up to find all of the toys that he had carefully placed in his toy box the night before had been thrown all around his room while he slept. All this and the noises in the walls were getting more frequent and were heard everywhere in the house. My superstitious wife was becoming scared that the local urban legend was true, that Victoria Teller still haunted the house. She reasoned that the spirit was becoming more active because we were so happily preparing for the holiday with our son, something she never got to do. I laughed at her theory. I shouldn't have. Christmas Eve, my wife and I put Caleb to bed. We had to return to his room several times to tell him that if he didn't go to sleep, Santa wouldn't bring him anything. When I was convinced that he was finally going to stay in his bedroom, I picked the puppy up from my mother's house and brought it home. We hadn't named him yet, but he was a golden retriever puppy that was as energetic as he was soft and fluffy. After playing with him for a while, we put him to bed in his crate, ate the cookies Caleb left for Santa, and turned in for the night. I was jerked from my slumber by a blood-curdling scream. My wife and I followed our son's cries for help to the living room. Caleb had snuck out of bed and found the puppy. Instead of the happy fluff ball that we had left by the tree, he found a mangled metal crate filled and surrounded by fur, blood, and chunks of discarded meat. My wife took Caleb into another room to console him, while I checked for intruders and signs of a break-in. I found nothing, so I returned to the living room and began cleaning up the mess. I was kneeling on the floor, convincing myself that there was a silver lining in the fact that we had hardwood floors instead of carpet, when I heard a tinkling noise come from the tree. I turned my head just in time to see a pair of big blue eyes staring at me from the branches. I jumped to my feet and backed up a few paces just as the first doll dropped from the tree. I was followed by 3 others. They were those delicate porcelain dolls, wearing what were probably pretty little dresses at one time. I couldn't tell because the dresses were covered in dirt and blood. I watched with a mixture of terror and disbelief as all 4 dolls slowly rose from the ground and started towards me. The screams of my wife and son snapped me out of my horrified trance. The dolls' heads turned as I ran from the room to find my family. I raced up the stairs to my bedroom, where I found my wife standing on our bed with Caleb in her arms. Dozens of porcelain dolls, varying in states of damage and filth, were standing on the floor surrounding the bed. They were making their way toward my loved ones with their tiny arms stretched out, reaching for the woman and child who were desperately trying to stay away. I started kicking the little demons out of the way as I hurried to the rescue of my wife and child. I didn't think a bunch of fucking dolls would be so hard to push through, but I was wrong. For every one that I kicked away, 4 more came at me. They grabbed and pulled and thrashed a bit, and I found myself moving away from the bed instead of toward it. After noticing most of the dolls had directed their attention to me, I yelled for my wife to run. I hoped that I served as enough of a distraction for the demon toys that her and Caleb could get away unharmed. The dolls that were still trying to reach them were clinging to the sides of the bed, climbing with delicate little hands. My wife jumped off of the bed, stumbled and fell. Caleb's head hit the floor, and the resulting cries caught the attention of many of the dolls I was desperately trying to fight off and keep away. My wife tried to right herself and gather our son before the wave of small monsters got to them, but she was too slow. I watched as the dolls quickly swarmed Caleb and began tearing at his flesh. My wife started trying to get them away, but they turned on her when Caleb stopped thrashing. I made my way to them just as my wife stopped fighting. I saw the despair in her eyes as a doll with black hair and a grey tattered dress bit a chunk from her throat. The creatures moved so fast, there were so many of them. We didn't stand a chance. I don't know how long I stood in my bedroom, watching a horde of dolls ripping apart the 2 people I loved the most in the world, before I realized that I was no longer being attacked. Every porcelain creature was crowded around what was left of my wife and son, feasting on them. I've regretted what I did next every day since. I ran. I bounded down the steps as fast as my feet would carry me. I reached the front door when I heard a woman's voice come from the 2nd floor. "That's right, my children. Fill those bellies so you can grow big and strong." I shut the door behind me and fell down the steps of the front porch. After vomiting up the cookies I had eaten earlier that night, I turned to look at the house. Peeking out of the window, illuminated by the colourful Christmas lights, was a gaunt woman wearing a tattered black dress. She smiled through a veil of stringy hair as a doll climbed up the front of her dress and into her arms, then closed the curtain. Hello, I'm Wayne. I am a 20-year-old literature major at a university college, and, like the title says, I recently had the most insane pet shop visit in my entire life. You see, I work part-time in a local pet shop near my dorm. College isn't really that forgiving when it came to the expenses, so I opted to do part-time work here and there to at least help my dad with the payments. It was a pretty decent job since I'm actually fond of animals and people didn't visit the pet shop much, other than to buy stuff for their pets, or just walk around and see if there's a new cute puppy to adopt. When Christmas break came, I worked full-time to accommodate the sudden onslaught of people. Men come in to buy a puppy or a kitten for their girlfriend, while some others buy a bowl or a leash, or maybe a new collar with the silver bell. It wasn't exactly a busy day like the mall or anything, but it was bustling. On Christmas Eve, we were open until 11 p.m. for those who were looking for last-minute presents. When the last customer rushed out the door, I started to close up shop. I locked the front door, turned the open sign to close, and turned off all the lights except the one for the counter. I checked to see if the heater was on, then wore my jacket and walked to the back door. I stopped. Something was wrong. I could feel the hair on my nape standing up, my hand on the knob starting to sweat, and my ears straining for a sound other than the animals. Someone else was inside the shop. I swallowed and slowly reached for the steel bat my manager always kept near the door. Steeling my resolve, I turned quickly to see who was inside. Whoever, whatever it was massive. My 5 feet stature felt even smaller when the figure straightened up, stretching its back and shoulders and slowly turning towards me, its red, glowing eyes fixating on me, still wielding the steel bat in the smallest hope that it leaves me alone. When it spoke, it had a low, booming voice, its breath hot and rancid. It just said one word: puppy. What? I must have looked stupid, because when a few seconds passed by, it repeated what it had said. Puppy. Do you have them? Yeah, in the kennel out back. Why was I telling it where the puppies were? Heck, why was it even looking for puppies? Give me one, it said, holding out its hand as something materialized from its palm. A piece of paper? No, a letter. It had large scribblings on it, undoubtedly from a toddler. I started to read the paper slowly. Dear Satan, for Christmas I want a puppy. I've been good all year, and Mom said I could get one if I write to you. Love, Maggie. The paper disintegrated into dust and I stepped back. Satan? Give me the puppy and I'll give you anything as payment. Still bewildered, I put down the bat in my bag to get a puppy from the kennel. I wrapped up the small creature in a blanket draping from the heater and slowly went back to the front of the shop. I showed Satan the pup and handed it to him gently. So no returns, no exchanges. Vaccines are available at the nearest vet, and have a nice Christmas? This will suffice. What will you take as payment? Satan asked me. Payment? I don't know. Frankly, my mind is just blank that Satan, the Satan, is here in the pet shop on Christmas Eve just because a toddler misspelled Santa. I don't know. Enough money to finish college, I guess. Without all the stupid student loan things, I said, skeptical that it would even be real. This could just be a dream. Done. With a snap of his fingers, Satan and the puppy are gone. The next morning I found a small briefcase at the foot of my bed. It was dark in colour and had a gold string with a note tied to it. A price to pay for the pup. I quickly opened the case and saw dollars, lots of it. I still work at the pet shop even after that. Late night shoppers still come by, but nothing will ever top off handing a pup to Satan himself. A few years ago on Christmas Eve, my friend Frank and I were having a drive around. I'm pretty sure we were just getting some last-minute shopping done, and at one point we stopped by a CVS to get some cards. By this time it was pretty dark outside. On our way out we were stopped by a heavy-set woman who was waiting by the entrance. She asked if there was any way we could give her a ride down the street. Now, under normal circumstances, I would immediately say no and come up with some excuse about how I need to be somewhere ASAP. I don't let random strangers in my car. This world is too crazy now. But given that it was Christmas Eve and it was snowing pretty hard, I decided to help. She got in the back seat and said she lived just down the street, not even 5 minutes away. Before I headed in that direction, I drove across the street to the bank. Not that I needed to inform her, but while I was at the ATM drive-thru, I was just explaining that I needed to get some money out and then we'll head towards our home. That's when shit got awkward real fast. She asked me if I'd be able to let her borrow some money until she gets paid again. I glanced over at Frank really quickly, who looked like he wanted to just start cracking up. but he held it in. "We literally picked this lady up 2 minutes ago, and she's asking to borrow money as if she's a friend." All I could say was, "Excuse me?" She just asked again like it was no big deal. I followed up by asking her how I know I would get my money back, as I don't have her contact info. Then she replied by saying she'll give me her cell phone number, but it's been cut off right now, and it'll be back on next week. I just wanted to fucking laugh. Did she honestly think I was gonna believe this crap? So I took another $20 out of the ATM. I definitely wasn't going to give it to her, but I put it in my wallet and told her I'd give her the money when we got to her house. Once we were on the main road, I asked her for directions, but she'd weirdly decided to change her mind. She now didn't want to go home. Instead, she wanted to go to a friend's house. This was getting too suspicious, and I really just wanted to pull over and tell her to get the hell out of my car, but I kept driving and followed her new directions. Wherever she took us was far out of my way. It was about 15 minutes from the original destination already, and it was mostly side roads that we were taking. I wasn't too familiar with the area either, and I could tell we were pretty much in the ghetto. She finally had me pull over and said, "Here is fine." I wasn't exactly sure which house belonged to her so-called friend, because there were a few on the left side of the street. The right was a cemetery, which was kind of freaky. I waited for her to thank me or say something, anything. Finally, she got the hell out of my car, but she just sat in the back seat with an awkward smile on her face. I looked back and asked if she was waiting for her friend to come out. She quickly said, "No, I'm waiting for my money." I looked at Frank again. We were both pretty stunned by her answer. I wasn't about to let some stranger I just helped talk to me like I owe her something. So I told her I'm not giving her the money, and if she needs help, she can ask her friend. She started getting loud, demanding that I give her the money that I promised her. This shit was crazy. I just wanted this psycho out of my car. I looked out of my window, and by this point there were other people in the street and on the sidewalk. I'm not sure if these people just happened to be outside, or if they heard her yelling, or, hell, if she had something planned. My mind was racing. I couldn't think straight, and she wouldn't stop. I realized that these people outside were getting closer to my car. Then I heard my front door handle trying to be opened. Some man was outside my window yelling and asking what was going on. So I finally just took the $20 out of my wallet and threw it at her. She grabbed it up and instantly left my car, then took off running. I got out of that neighborhood as fast as I could. When we found the main road, I felt a little better, but I was pissed that I just got played by some crazy lady. I didn't even care about the $20 because I already knew I wasn't getting it back. But mark my words, I'll never give another stranger a ride again. The man in the front of me was your typical upper-middle-class suburban dad, except for the dishevelled hair and streaks of dirty and dried blood on his forehead. He was being bandaged by these 3 nurses, including Jo, the one who called me. Being the only female in the force, I was given the sensitive tasks, aka everything that involved collecting the testimony of hospitalized people in the middle of the night. Ivan Daniels. Everyone knew his wife had died of a degenerative disease at only 32, around 5 years ago, and was the first person in our town to be cryogenically frozen. Mr. Daniels then started a foundation under her name to raise funds to help other victims. The illness is incurable, but the palliative care makes a difference and is incredibly expensive. Their only daughter, Lindsay, is no older than 9 now. His rules struck me as quite odd. "Why was that, Mr. Daniels?" "For her own safety, and my daughter's, of course," he replied enigmatically. I know from experience that giving people a set of rules never works. One rule will always be broken, even if there's only one. "And what's the problem with the lights, Mr. Daniels?" I insisted. He was distressed, so I had to be very clear to get useful information from him. "Oh, right, silly me. I'm sorry, officer, I'm still shaken. That's because I'm convinced that our house is haunted. Haunted? By who or what? I don't know, honestly. But I'm sure that's why Alice attacked me. She's such a good girl. Please don't be so harsh on her when you find her. Alice? Who's Alice and what happened to her? That's Alice Webber, my neighbour. Miss, she's 17 or 19, I think. The babysitter. Mr. Daniels elucidated. She's the one who attacked me. The nurses started cleaning him up softly, and I noticed his face was all scratched. His left arm was slightly off, probably dislocated, and there was a larger wound close to his collarbone, apparently a stabbing wound, but it was clear that this hit didn't connect properly. A teenager did this to you? I asked, as Nurse Joe put his shoulder back in place with a crack. Yes, but please, officer, she was possessed by something evil. Yes, but please, officer, she was possessed by something evil, I'm sure. She's always so nice to my little girl. Please treat her as you would treat a daughter or a young sister. Those words didn't appeal to me, as my younger sister stole all my money to escape with her crackhead boyfriend when she was 15. And where is Miss Webber now? I asked. Mr. Daniels sighed deeply. Who knows? I think I hit my head or something, because after she attacked me I was out of it for a while. I don't know how long, 20 minutes maybe. All the while my daughter was sleeping like an angel upstairs. The first thing I did was check up on her, but thankfully whatever evil entity possessed her to attack me didn't want to harm Lindsay. Anyway, she escaped while I was unconscious. Joe made a note to have his head checked. Okay, I know you're distressed, but can you please tell me the facts in chronological order, at least superficially? We can go back for the details later. Sure, I'm so sorry I'm troubling you, he sighed again. So I had an important dinner today. I was hoping to get a generous donation to my wife's foundation. Are you familiar? Absolutely, Mr. Daniels. Everyone in this town knows you're a philanthropist. Do go on, please. Oh, you're too kind to me, officer. Getting donations is the least I can do for my soulmate. I'd do anything to have her back. But at least I know she would love to help people like that, he said, filled with a burning passion. He then went back to his mild-mannered self. I planned ahead and asked Alice to come babysit. She agreed, of course. Alice and my daughter Lindsay really like each other, and I pay fairly for a job well done. All right, how long has Alice been babysitting for you, and was she normal when she arrived? I think around 4 months. Yes, I think so. She's a quiet and pleasant girl in general. One would imagine her relationship with your family was longer, considering how you get along, I remarked. Oh, wasn't Vicky your babysitter? Joe asked. Mr. Daniels frowned in pain. She was, the poor thing. And she had been at my house the night she disappeared too. I think that's yet another villainy caused by my house. I swear I'd leave that hell of a place if it didn't hold so many dear memories of my wife. Vicky, Victoria Allister, was your babysitter? I asked. Of course, such an important case wasn't given to me, but I knew about it. The girl had vanished a few months ago. It does seem like you're cursed, Joe cooed. She was often insensitive, but I knew that the only way to cope with seeing human misery daily is being cheerful about everything else. All the nurses left the room. So you left for dinner? Yes, it was around 7. Alice arrived 10 minutes earlier as usual. I paid her beforehand and gave the instructions. I told her it was better to lock themselves in the kitchen and wait for at least half an hour if the lights went crazy. Okay, and then? I was back by 11 or so. Nothing weird happened the whole night, and Alice didn't call, so I assumed things were fine. The lights of the house were all turned off, but it wasn't unusual. The babysitter usually naps with Lindsay, as she hates falling asleep alone. But Alice was awake, waiting for me in the dark dining room. She had a big kitchen knife. Are you sure it was Alice? Wasn't the house dark? I am sure because it was dim due to the Christmas decorations. Alice attacked me with such hatred. She wanted to kill me. That's not the girl I know, of course. She was possessed or something, I'm sure of that. And what did you do? I did my best to avoid her hits without hurting her badly. I'm stronger than her, obviously, but I was surprised and careful. She was not. I threw her on a coffee table, but I think she was completely uninjured by the time she left. Did she say something? I don't remember. She screamed in the struggle, but I can't really remember if she said anything. I don't think my brain processed any words. Well, that's to be expected. About the Christmas lights, when did they start to act up? As soon as we put them on, right after Thanksgiving. I bought a whole new set of lights when the first started flickering in a creepy way, but the second was glitching too. I called my electrician and he found nothing wrong, so I left them on. Lindsay loves Christmas because it particularly reminds her of her mum, and it's not twinkling weirdly all the time anyway. Did anything weird happen before that? Regarding the house being haunted, I mean. I decided to entertain his supernatural beliefs. Maybe it would lead to a more rational clue. His hands were shaking a little now. There's some sort of presence, I don't know. Something bad. I only feel it when Lindsay is not around, so maybe it only hates me. Mr. Daniels nervously laughed. It could be some kind of vengeful spirit then. Did you wrong anyone, Mr. Daniels? I asked, dead serious, even though I didn't think so. This man helped people. I sure hope I didn't, he replied very quietly. Maybe someone thought you could help them, but you didn't, I suggested. How are the finances going on the foundation? Do you help everyone that looks for you? On the foundation? They're fine, I guess. I'd have to ask my accountant, of course. I'm just the guy who shakes hands to make sure the checks will come. I stopped to consider it all for a moment. We had an injured father, a missing, freaked-out babysitter, and the former babysitter missing for months. All the while the little girl slept. Maybe Alice gave her something to keep her from waking up, even with screams and crashing sounds. But this premeditation is not compatible with being possessed, if there's such a thing. Is Lindsay always a heavy sleeper? She can either sleep like a rock or wake up easily. Is she afraid of the lights twinkling weirdly? It makes her uncomfortable, but I think I'm more afraid than she is. By the way, where is she now? With my sister-in-law. I don't want her to set foot in that house again. What if I go crazy next and hurt my daughter? Fair enough. Mr. Daniels, I'm going to ask for your keys. I want to see the Christmas lights for myself. I thought all the cops were skeptic. I thought that too, but as the only female cop in town, I couldn't afford to be like all the other cops. I had to be better. So I sent Mr. Daniels to stay with his daughter, and stayed at his beautiful house for almost 2 days before the Christmas lights started twinkling indifferently. Unmistakable dits and dahs, twinkling with no rhythm. I took a few notes, then asked for reinforcements, an assert and seizure. The rest was easy. Mr. Daniels had been skimming a lot of money from his charity. He was using most of the donations in order to try to resuscitate his cryogenically frozen wife. Vicky Allister was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and was murdered after catching him red-handed. But Ivan Daniels wasn't an unscrupulous killer. He was actually a good father and husband, whose soul became twisted by his loss. Daniels felt bad for the collateral damage, although not bad enough to stop, so he was always anxious and afraid someone would find out about his crime. He felt haunted by Vicky. The lights flickering made him panic every time because he thought it was a sign that Vicky was watching him. He wasn't wrong. According to Mr. Daniels, Vicky was 99% pulverized by one of the Russian substances he was testing in order to resuscitate his wife. But I found Alice in the trunk of his car, a bloodied kitchen knife still in her hand. He had squeezed her neck until she'd passed out, thus the dislocated shoulder. He then tied her arms and legs, put a bag on her head, and left her to die in a confined space. There were scratch marks on the inside of the car. She had suffered and fought for her life until the end. Poor girl. She got some terrifying information and made the wrong move. I wish I'd found her sooner. I testified at his trial, making up some plausible story about how I found out his murders. It was clear that the remorse was destroying him inside, and he seemed relieved to pledge guilty for them. You don't know Morse code, do you, Mr. Daniels? I asked. He shook his head, no. But Alice knew, and Vicky's ghost. That was a heck of a genius way to communicate. After a lot of thinking, I decided not to disclose just one of the secrets that Vicky had told me. Mr. Daniels froze his wife while she was still alive. I was friends with her a long time ago. Maybe science will catch up in the future. Who knows? Some of you may know, some of you may not know. Most of you probably won't even care. But I like to read and record stories, make videos for them, and post them on a very popular website. You know the one. Now, the videos that I make are very low budget, nowhere near the professional quality like others put out. But I don't even own a computer or have fancy recording equipment like they do. I do it all from my iPhone. The reason I'm telling you all this is because this is what led up to the encounter I had last night. An encounter with the devil. I arrived home from work yesterday afternoon around 5:30. I went about my normal routine, made coffee, made dinner, drank coffee with dinner, which consisted of 3 hot dogs and 2 packets of Oriental flavoured ramen noodles. That's been my dinner now for about 2 weeks, because after all, I work for a living, therefore I'm broke. Anyway, I sat down at my dining room table and ate my food. After that, I decided to try and record a story. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my iPhone, and set up the screen recorder. I was just about to press the record button when suddenly my entire house lost power, and I was in complete darkness. I know I paid the electric bill, I thought to myself. That's why I'm broke. Just then a red light started to appear in mid-air, directly in the centre of my living room, and it was growing brighter as each second passed. Soon, thick grey smoke began to flow out of the light, so thick that I began to cough and choke uncontrollably. Suddenly, an intense yellow light flashed, totally blinding me. I covered my eyes with my hand to shield them from the light. Seconds later, I moved my hand and every single light in my house was back on. The smoke had cleared, and there he stood. It was the devil. That's right, Satan. Beelzebub, the Prince of Darkness, was now standing in the middle of my living room holding a pitchfork. His entire body was blood red. From the waist down he resembled the back end of a goat with hooves, hair and a tail. The upper part resembled that of a very muscular man with arms, hands and a head with horns. His face looked exactly, and I mean exactly like Dave Grohl when he played the devil in that Tenacious D Pick of Destiny movie. We stared at each other for what seemed like forever, when finally I asked, "What the hell are you doing here?" The devil smiled. "I am here to kill you and take your soul to hell," he said. "What? Why?" I asked. "Well, most people don't know this," he said, "but when I'm not down in hell trying to figure out how to conquer all mankind, I like to browse a certain website for creepy and crazy horror stories. It helps me relax. I especially like the ones about me. Now I've listened to many stories by many different people, and they were all quite impressive. That is, until I found your stories. Your stories are dreadful, pieces of trash. You read like a first grader, and you sound like an imbecile. Your editing sucks, but I must say that your pictures are pretty cool. But your name? Holy hell. Your name is the stupidest thing of all. You give storytelling a bad name. So I am here to kill you and rid the world of you and your pathetic attempts at entertainment. Now prepare to die." With his left hand he raised his pitchfork high above his head, and as his right hand extended out toward me, fire began forming in the palm of his hand. I started to freak out. Wait! You like to make deals, right?" "Yeah, let's make a deal," I said. He lowered his pitchfork and cupped his hand to extinguish the flames. He then stared at me with that Clint Eastwood High Plains drifter stare and asked, "What kind of deal?" Okay, devil," I said nervously. "If you can do the 3 things that I asked you to do, then I will let you kill me and take my soul to hell. But if you can't, then you have to play all my videos in hell on a loop for eternity." The devil raised his head in confidence and said, "I can do anything. Deal." I just made a deal with the devil, I thought to myself. What am I going to do now? I thought about it for a little while, then figured, if I was going to die, I might as well have some fun with it all. I said, "Okay, can you do the Macarena and sing the part at the end?" The devil placed his pitchfork on my couch, stood in the center of the room, and began to bounce up and down as he extended his hands, flipped them over, crossed arms to touch his shoulders, uncrossed back to touch his head, then grabbed his hips and swung them around in a circular motion and said, "Hey, Macarena," at the end. It was hilarious. I wish I had the frame of mind to videotape it. I burst out laughing. "Done," said the devil. "What's next?" I couldn't stop laughing. "You are going to pay for this," the devil said. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, trying to compose myself. "Let me think." Given the rare chance that I would actually beat the devil, I thought I wanted something to show for it. I said, "Okay, devil, can you give me $37.2 million in $100 bills in a brown duffel bag?" The devil smiled and said, "That's easy." He snapped his fingers and suddenly a brown duffel bag appeared on the floor by the front door. "It's all there," the devil said. "You can count it if you want." I figured I get to live just a little bit longer, so I did, and yes, it was all there. "Done," the devil said again. "One more and you're mine." The devil grinned his maniacal grin. "I told you before, I can do anything," he said. "Okay," I said to myself. "The time for the fun and games is over. Time to get serious. After all, my life depended on it." I desperately tried to think of something that the devil could not do. Nope, he can do that. Nope, he can do that too. I was racking my brain, and I just so happened to look over at my television set to my entire Christmas movie collection on the bookcase underneath it. Then it hit me. Christmas, I thought to myself. I love Christmas movies. I could watch them all year long. Hallmark has the best though. "I got you now, devil. I'll be right back," I said. I ran desperately into my bedroom and grabbed the one thing on my nightstand that has never let me down. I held it in my right hand and placed my arm behind my back and walked out to the living room to face the devil one last time. I stood there face to face, eye to eye with the devil. "I have a special place in hell for you," he said. I chuckled. "I don't think so, devil. Can you—" I moved my arm from behind my back. As I did so, I asked, "Can you put your hand on the Holy Bible?" The devil shrieked and stepped back. "You can do anything, right? Do it," I said. "Do it and take me and my soul to hell. What are you waiting for?" I yelled. He tried. He really did. I've got to give him that. The devil shrieked continuously as he lifted his hand, placing it over the Bible about 4 inches away. The shrieking grew louder as he lowered his shaking hand. At about 2 inches away, thick black smoke and fire began bursting throughout his whole body. At 1 inch away, the devil shrieked the most ear-piercing shriek that I've ever heard in my life. I covered my left ear with my left hand and fell to my knees, holding the Bible in high above my head in my right hand. Another blinding flash of light, I closed my eyes once again. I opened them and the devil was gone. I looked at the clock in the cable box. It was 6:37 a.m. I slowly rose to my feet. My first thought was, how am I going to get this soot off my walls? Seriously though, I held the Bible close to my chest and thanked God for helping me. Just then my phone rang. I placed the Bible on the dining room table and picked up my phone. "Unknown caller," it read. I usually don't answer calls from numbers I don't know, but after what just happened, I figured, what the hell? I pressed accept and held it to my ear. Before I could even say hello, I heard the crackling of flames mixed with desperate screams of torture and despair. Then I heard it, a familiar voice, my voice, very faintly, in the background. It was one of the stories that I'd read about 4 months ago. I smiled. The sound of the devil shrieking was heard right before the line went dead. I ended the call and immediately blocked that number. I looked over at the duffel bag by the door and thought, what am I still doing here? I grabbed my phone and started to search Christmas-themed towns in the US. I figured Christmas saved my life. I want to live there. I came across North Pole, Alaska. I grabbed a suitcase from my bedroom closet and packed all my Christmas movies in there, as they were the only things I cared about. I loaded them in the car, went back inside, grabbed the duffel bag, my phone, and a Bible, got in the car, and left the rest of it behind. I called my landlord and told him I was moving out. I called my boss and quit on the spot. I drove to the nearest major airport and booked a flight to North Pole, Alaska. I'm sitting in the waiting area right now, waiting for my flight. The first thing I'm going to do when I get there is record this story.